Alright guys, so over the last couple of weeks we have been covering the stories of Israeli citizens that have been going around and violently attacking some of the aid trucks that are supposed to be on their way to Gaza. I've seen examples of them pulling aid off of the trucks and throwing it around on the ground. I've seen them lighting it on fire, and I've also shown you guys videos like that one Palestinian truck driver who was not even delivering aid to Gaza and was still violently assaulted by some of these Israelis. Now, I've told you guys this entire time that this would not be able to happen if it wasn't for the full complicity of the Israeli security forces. And today, I see this story. Here from Haaretz, an Israeli outlet. They say, spill it onto the road, how right-wing Israeli activists are organizing to block aid trucks to Gaza. A far-right movement is dispatching hundreds of young people to interfere with the aid, who threaten truck drivers, vandalize goods, and are not averse to using violence. And here's the kicker. They say that they are aided by information from members of the military and the police. Would you look at that? Now, some of the details, because this is absolutely insane. They say a network of WhatsApp groups run by a far-right movement calling itself Lo Nishkach, or Hebrew for We Won't Forget, has been especially active in the last couple of weeks as members plan to block aid trucks heading to Gaza. The groups are the main tool being used to organize hundreds of the movement's members, young people from the religious Zionist right, most of them teenagers, to interfere with the delivery of humanitarian aid. Real-time alert, one activist announced in the messages last week. Right now, a convoy of trucks is on its way to Hamas and is passing the Barachia Junction, headed towards Ashkelon, on the way to the Erez crossing. Come and block the aid to the Nazis. Now, the Nazis that he's referring to here would be the countless hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Palestinians in Gaza who are being starved to death. Okay, that's who he's talking about here as the Nazis. The aid is not going to Hamas. The aid is going to Palestinian civilians who are currently in the midst of facing a massive collective punishment campaign from the Israeli military. Okay, they continue. They say, the activists are summoned to interchanges around the country and instructed to block the trucks in any way possible. Last week, 2 trucks were torched and 2 drivers, a Palestinian and an Israeli, were wounded. No arrests were made. No arrests were made, but we are going to continue hearing from the U.S. government about how we don't need the ICC, we don't need the International Court of Justice because Israel is a democracy and they have processes in place to hold their own accountable. We're talking about multiple trucks being attacked, set on fire, and then people being brutally assaulted, and no arrests were made. I'm sure they're going to hold themselves accountable, though. They say the messages that have been sent in the groups illustrate the movement's methods of operation. They also show the advanced information that they say they get from sources in the military and police, among others, saying, quote, when it comes to trucks, it's important to obtain a receipt from the truck driver and to photograph it, one message says. If the receipt says Crossing Points Authority with the stamp of one of the crossings, Kerem Shalom or Nitzana or Erez, etc., do not allow passage. So they're hunting these truck drivers right now. In recent days, right-wing activists have shown up at the Tarkumia checkpoint in the West Bank and checked one truck after another. For the most part, the police were nowhere to be seen. In footage taken Sunday at the entrance to Jerusalem, activists are seen stopping truck drivers and demanding to see their documents. In another video, a driver is seen putting his truck in reverse to try to get away from them. They continue, they say, in an official message, the group's administrators called on people to refrain from actions involving violence and vandalism, but the dominant message was different. Quote, puncture tires, a member wrote in one of the groups. Another warned, quote, don't say it in the group, we're risking arrest. They went on to say that the most important thing was to take as much of the aid off the trucks as possible and spill it into the road. It gets worse, guys. One activist praised friends who had participated in blocking the aid, saying, you are holy emissaries, she wrote. And another wrote, quote, with God's help, children in Gaza will die thanks to us. And then another replied, amen, amen, may it be so, King David said to fight hard. So, just in case there was any confusion as to, oh, well, they were just talking about Hamas, they just don't want aid going to Hamas. Here you have somebody explicitly saying, with God's help, children, not Hamas militants, children in Gaza will die thanks to us. So they know exactly what they're doing, right? And they are being fully aided by Israeli security forces who are telling them, this truck is going here. This is aid that is intended to Gaza. If you want to go intercept it, then have fun, I guess. I mean, this is what's been happening, right? And this is coming at the same time that they have been shutting down some of the access points getting into Gaza, meaning the amount of aid that has been getting into Gaza has fallen off a cliff. And already before all of this, it wasn't even nearly enough. So, and this is also on top of the fact that in the northern portion of Gaza, there is a full-blown famine, according to the World Food Program. We'll get to more of that here in a second, but I mean, it's as horrifying of a situation as you could possibly imagine. Now, of course, we have the absolute psychopaths in the Israeli government, guys like Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, and he is raging at Israel's police chief for helping to protect some of these Gaza aid convoys. So he's mad that in some circumstances, because of these attacks from these far-right Zionists on the aid convoys, he's getting mad that in response to that, some of the Israeli police have been sent to go and guard some of these trucks. So he doesn't want them to be giving security to these aid trucks, right? And he instead is proposing that the cabinet, the war cabinet, should be stopping Gaza aid trucks, not protesters. So he's not saying there shouldn't be attacks. He's saying we should be doing the attacks. I want to be the one doing the attacks on the aid trucks. I want to prevent all aid from getting into Gaza. I want to starve the children of Gaza. That's what he's saying here openly. By the way, there's another statement that came out, I believe, either earlier today or yesterday, where Itamar Ben-Gvir was openly talking about how he wanted to resettle Gaza and that he himself would like to live in Gaza after the Palestinians are fully ethnically cleansed. So these are the kinds of guys that we're talking about at the highest tiers in the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu. So just to recap for people here from our boy Prem, in the same week that the United States claimed that Israel is not blocking aid or breaking international law, can we just pause on that for a second? That the official position of the U.S. government, of the Biden administration, the State Department, top to bottom, the official position is that Israel is not blocking aid from getting into Gaza. I mean, it's so detached from reality that it's genuinely hard to believe that they would openly say this, right? Now, we know the reason that they're saying this is because if they admit that Israel is hampering aid from getting into Gaza, then the weapon shipments that we are giving them are totally illegal under things like the Leahy law. So we know the reason why they're lying about this, but it really is just so fucking brazen. To say they're not blocking the aid? What planet are you living on? Now, again, just a recap of after they've made this claim, what's been happening. So a mob set fire to the UNRWA, the UNRWA, or the United Nations Relief and Works Agency headquarters in Jerusalem after months of harassment, including incitement led by Jerusalem Deputy Mayor Area King, who said it was an honor to be responsible for the UNRWA HQ temporarily shutting down after the attack. So let's not even entertain the idea that like, oh, there are some bad apples and they don't represent Israel as a whole or the Israeli government. I mean, this is the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, and he's saying it was an honor to be part of a group that incited the attack on an UNRWA headquarters. I mean, what are we doing? They say, another example here, settlers pillage aid trucks and smash supplies, reportedly helped again by inside information about the truck's movements from Israeli officers. Israeli forces have attacked clearly marked United Nations cars in Rafah, killing an Indian national staff member. We also had the U.S. advance another $1 billion to Israel after all of this has happened. We also had settlers who have attacked this Palestinian truck driver I showed you guys the other day because they thought that he was driving an aid truck, and then they deflated the tires of 2 trucks and then pillaged them and danced on them as Israeli soldiers looked on, doing nothing. We also had at least 80 separate Israeli attacks on aid in Gaza since January alone, recorded by the UK-based research group Forensic Architecture. They said, quote, "The frequency and widespread nature of these attacks suggest that Israel is systematically targeting aid." Systematically targeting aid. I mean, over 80 separate attacks on aid trucks or aid convoys since January. I mean, they say, finishing off here, International Criminal Court, of course, Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan requests war crime arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as the Hamas leadership. And of course, we've talked about the absolute freakout from Israel, from the United States over those arrest warrants. I'll probably have more coming either today or tomorrow on that, because it is just absolutely relentless, the amount that they are losing their minds over this. But we're going to move on here, because this also ties into the attacks on the aid, obviously. But you guys remember that bullshit pier that the United States said we're going to build off the coast of Gaza to help get aid to the people of Gaza? And remember how literally months ago at this point, I was telling you that this is a completely absurd idea at face value, and that even in a best case scenario, it wouldn't even be a fraction of the amount of aid that needs to get into Gaza, that in order to actually meet the mark of what experts are saying needs to get in, you absolutely have to open all of these land crossings in order to allow trucks to come over. So remember that bullshit pier idea? Well, over $300 million later, months later, after a famine has now consumed the people of Gaza, we have this. Due to logistical issues in distributing the aid coming through the pier, the US, Israeli, and UN officials are discussing alternative routes for the safe movement of staff and cargo. So this literally happened within days. Within days of them finishing this pier and then attempting to begin flooding aid through, which again is a tiny fraction of what's actually needed, but within days, it's already been completely botched. It's already been completely botched. Now, we had a press conference here with Secretary Major General Patrick Ryder. And I think that this was interesting for a number of different reasons. He's talking about the Gaza pier off the coast. And let's just go ahead and listen to this, and then I'll pick out some parts that I think were notable.
And 69 metric tons. Am I accurate to say zero has been delivered to the people of Gaza so far?
You'd have to check with the World Food Program. I know that aid is getting in, but it's not accurate that no aid has been delivered. You know, we've been doing airdrops. We've been helping to facilitate aid coming over the land crossings. But the Causeway has been able to get over 569 metric tons of aid into Gaza for onward delivery. So, yes, very shortly, I think you'll see aid starting to be delivered.
That has been delivered, right? Today?
As of today, I do not believe so.
Okay. And is Israel, you said Israel is cooperating on this, trying to help, but it seems from what you said, the desperation of people created security issues for the distribution of aid from the assembly area, and that desperation is related to the fact that Israel is shutting down aid routes, right?
So we're shifting from questions to editorializing. I'm going to go ahead and go to somebody else's.
Okay, first off, that was not editorializing. What he was just describing there is that Israel has shut down most of the other crossings into Gaza, which has led to people being much more desperate, and therefore this idea of having a floating pier off the coast of Gaza and then just hoping that the aid is going to get to where it needs to go is kind of ludicrous, right? He's tying the two together. In fact, the entire reason why the United States built this pier in the first place is because they couldn't get Israel to stop blocking the aid from getting over the land crossings. There's literally no other reason to build this kind of a port, right? So it's pretty ridiculous for them to continue to stand up here and to act as if like the difficulty with getting aid into Gaza is some like amorphous thing, and that the US and Israel are desperately trying to get more aid to Gaza. It's like, no, it's Israel that's blocking the aid. They just have to stop blocking the aid in order for that problem to be addressed. Now, the other part of this that's pretty revealing, I think, is that, as he kind of low-key admitted there, really none of the aid has gotten to its intended destination. I saw other reports that said maybe 5 out of the initial first 16 sort of shipments ended up getting where they wanted them to go. You know, I've seen other reports that none of them got to where they were supposed to go. So, I mean, it's up in the air whether or not it was a tiny trickle or zero trickle at all that managed to get in. But I want to circle back to this 569 metric ton number that he just referenced there, right? Because you may hear that and you're like, whoa, they just built this floating pier and already they've gotten almost 600 metric tons of aid into Gaza. That sounds like a lot, right? So because this New York Times article was paywalled, I had to take a screenshot of it here, but I decided to look this up, and I'm like, how much is a metric ton relative to like one truckload, for example? So here from the New York Times, the United Nations estimates that trucks carrying food to Gaza have been loaded with roughly 15 to 30 metric tons each The pier system cost an estimated $300 million and became operational on Thursday. No longer, right? It became operational last Thursday. It's already, before this upcoming Thursday, not functional. But they say on Friday, the first aid trucks began moving ashore so far. However, the operation has fallen short of its goal of bringing in 90 trucks a day and eventually ramping up to 150 trucks. So this is what I mean when I say, even in a best case scenario, this pier was a ridiculous idea, because their ideal goal here is 150 trucks per day, while experts are estimating we need between at least 500, but really more like 1,000 trucks per day getting into Gaza. And they built this pier to maybe, hypothetically, in a dream scenario, get 1/10 of that. That's what we're talking about with this pier idea, right? And you haven't even managed to do that. In fact, you haven't even managed to get like basically half of that in, right? So if you do the math on this, right, 569 metric tons that have managed to get through, well, it's 15 to 30 metric tons per truck. So if we split the difference here between 15 and 30, and you do the math on that, this is what, like less than 30 trucks or something that you've managed to get in through this $300 million pier that you just wasted months amid an ongoing famine trying to construct, instead of putting pressure on Israel to open the land crossings. I mean, all of this is just, it's so pathetic and bizarre that you would use this kind of an approach. Obviously, it was going to fail. Now, at the same time that that's happening, we also have the United Nations has halted all food distribution in Rafah after running out of supplies in the southern Gaza city. So the United Nations suspended food distribution in the southern city of Rafah on Tuesday due to a lack of supplies and an untenable security situation caused by Israel's expanding military operation. The United Nations warned that humanitarian operations across the territory were nearing collapse. So at this point, guys, there basically is no legitimate, robust amount of aid getting into Gaza. There already wasn't in the months prior, but right now, since they've invaded Rafah, it's been completely shut off, essentially. There's almost no aid getting into Gaza. And this was after we had reports, like here from Jacob of Axios, U.S. aid official, Samantha Powers is who he's referencing, says that famine has begun in northern Gaza. This was also after we have here from Cindy McCain, starving children and adults are dying the size of a skeleton, according to the World Food Program. So even after reports like this, after famine has already onset, after children and adults are dying as they look like skeletons, according to the World Food Program, we now have less aid that's getting in. Less aid. It's as horrible of a situation as you could possibly imagine, guys. And this is happening as we're wasting time building a fucking port that everybody knew was not going to work. And we also have this. At the same time, Joe Biden saying that he is no longer opposing Israel's plan for the final assault on Rafah. I mean, what are we supposed to take away from this? This was Joe Biden's red line, right, a couple months ago. Then it turned into, okay, well, I just don't want them to do like a major invasion of Rafah, but maybe if they're kind of low-key about it, then I'll be okay with that. And then now it basically looks like he's taken all of the chains off. I mean, how could anybody possibly make a reasonable argument when at least 800,000 of the 1.5 million Palestinians who were in Rafah have been forced to evacuate? And most of the people who were in Rafah were people who were told to go there previously because that was going to be the safe zone, right? So they've already been displaced. Now they're being displaced again and basically being told to go fuck off to the desert where there's nothing waiting for them, right? To walk through the rubble, the unexploded ordinances, the sniper fire, the airstrikes, and just go walk out into the Al-Mawasi desert. That's what they're telling them to do. 800,000 people in just a few weeks here, guys. 800,000 people displaced. The entire population of Gaza is only just over 2 million. We're talking about almost half the population of Gaza that has been displaced in the last couple of weeks. And this is what Joe Biden is maintaining is somehow like a limited operation that requires almost 1 million people to flee. That's what we're calling limited now. I mean, what are we doing? Now, I'll finish off with this because we had another resigning a U.S. official here. And this is the first Jewish Biden staffer that has resigned over the war. And her quote here in this interview with Ayman over on MSNBC, and shout out to Ayman, he's one of the only respectable, mainstream pundits on these major networks, and he does a great job. But her quote here was, "The breaking point for me was that the president is ignoring his own red line with the invasion of Rafah, and he's letting Netanyahu walk all over him." And she's 100% Correct. So, I mean, there you go. I mean, I don't think any of this was really surprising. I told you guys a couple of weeks ago when we started seeing these attacks on the aid trucks by these Israeli citizens that this could not be happening without the help and the support of Israeli security forces. And then we get confirmation of that. They are, in fact, being fed information by Israeli police, by some of the border guards, by Israeli security forces, and none of this should be surprising because this is part of their overall strategy. They have been using famine, they have been using starvation as a tool of war, right? This is what we heard from the ICC prosecutor just a couple of days ago. This is what we heard from Albanese a couple weeks ago, the UN Special Rapporteur. This is also what we saw in the ICJ genocide case. Every single reasonable, major human rights organization has already admitted, has already acknowledged this obvious reality that they are using starvation as a tool of war. Everybody except for the Joe Biden administration. Everybody except for the U.S. government broadly. We somehow can't figure out, right? We can't figure it out whether or not they've committed any war crimes, whether or not they're blocking the aid. I mean, it's ludicrous. It is so farcical at face value. All of this in service of continuing to arm and support and fund and give diplomatic cover for an ongoing genocide.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying